Welcome to the Winning Wellness Podcast, where we explore health, wellness, performance, and try to improve not only your quantity of life, but your quality of life. I'm your host, Mitch Schwartzman. Hi, everyone. Today, Jennifer Starks is joining us. She is a licensed professional counselor. I developed a little bit of a professional relationship with her over at Maryville, where she works and helps out the students there. And one thing that I really liked about sort of her bio or her background is that she has a little bit of a specialty in grief. And I was really hoping to kind of corner her into this conversation, not only for myself, because honestly, I've attended funerals and experienced loss, but I think that I've got a lot more of that coming up ahead in my own future. So selfishly, I wanted to be a little bit better prepared. And then also, I deal with so many student athletes, younger people, that are just experiencing loss for the first time in their lives. I was really hoping to have some sort of resource to sort of pass along to them. So thank you so much for joining us. And if you just maybe want to do a little bit of like a background and kind of fill us in on that career a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So like you said, my name is Jennifer Starks, and I am one of the therapists at Maryville University. And I've been a licensed therapist or been practicing therapy since about 2008, and got my license shortly thereafter. So I kind of came to it late in life, actually. I had my first couple of kids and then decided I wanted to do something different, and counseling was what I wanted to do. And I'll kind of go into that a little bit more later because part of my grief journey is what brought me into counseling, actually. So I went in to get my master's at SLU, and then I got my license, and I've been practicing ever since. And I've worked with all kinds of people. I've worked with children on the autism spectrum. I did that work for a little bit. I worked doing in-home therapy for children and families who have significant mental health issues, helping them be stabilized in their home. I worked with high school students and collegiate students, helping them get to college and stay in college. And now I'm working at the collegiate level. So just kind of a wide variety of work that I've done. And throughout my years, grief has been a part of the work that I've done. And so I wouldn't say that, I am this well-known like specialist in grief or anything like that, but I've come to it because I had to learn how to work with it and to serve others that are going through it. So that's kind of my background.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And then how would you define your current role or roles, whether it's at Maryville or doing any work away from there? Or
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I'm at Maryville right now, and I serve our students here. And it's a great service that Maryville provides for their students. They can have therapy whenever they need it. It's free, it's accessible, and it's just a good service that they can use when they're here. And collegiate students, especially this generation of students, are going through so much change. I mean, that's a changing time for anybody, but these are the students that are coming out of the pandemic. And so their high school experience and their college experience has been really wrapped up in the pandemic and all the changes in the world. And so just the need for mental health support is really, really prevalent amongst our students. And I find it a privilege to be able to be a part of that journey. And so that's like my main role. I do some private therapy outside of here. I just carry a couple clients, nothing big. And then I also do some adjunct teaching for a university in the area on topics like motivational interviewing, things like that are used within counseling.
And then sort of cutting right to the chase, you mentioned that you had dealt with some grief, and that's what led you into. Why did you choose to specialize in grief?
So it's interesting. I've been thinking about this. You mentioned like you've gone to funerals before and stuff like that, and it's a weird thing to say, but like I grew up going to funerals. So I'm a minister's daughter. And so we had a ton of people in our church. And so funerals are just something that I went to because we had people dying and my dad had to do the services. And so that part of it, I was really accustomed to. It wasn't unusual for me to know what to do at a funeral or whatever. And I didn't realize that wasn't everybody's experience until I met other people that, going to a family member's funeral was the first funeral they'd ever gone to when I'd been to, 20 or 30 throughout my lifetime. And so I say that to say that, I'd been around it and I'd seen other people experience it, loss in that way. But for me, I think what started this was a different kind of loss. And so when we talk about grief, mainly today, what I'll talk about is really losing someone, like the death of someone, because that's, I think, what we think about when we think of grief and loss. But there are different kinds of losses as well. Besides that, you can lose a job, you can lose a friendship, a relationship, just all kinds of things that, could happen in your life that create a loss, a sense of loss. And for me, the sense of loss came when I had my firstborn child. I won't say her name because she probably won't want me to put this out there, but she was born in 1999, and pretty much right off the bat, we knew that she was kind of a different kid, just different. She looked different, she acted different than other kids. And we kind of knew that, but we also were new parents, and so we didn't know what was going on. We knew we were struggling, but we just figured, well, we're new parents, we don't know what we're doing. And about 2 years later, she was diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And it's a really hard time in my life. I went through some depression, a lot of anxiety. I was also pregnant with my next one. There was a lot of fear that I would have another child on the spectrum. And I was also learning how to parent her because it was so different than what I thought it would be. And I remember very vividly, my best friend's mom took me out to lunch. And my best friend is deaf and has been deaf most of her life. And so my best friend's mom kind of understood some of the things I was feeling. And so she took me out to lunch and she told me that I needed to grieve the life I thought I was going to have. And I had never thought of grief in that way. But I realized that's exactly what I was feeling. I was feeling loss. I was feeling that I thought my life would be one way, and now it's going to be different. And I didn't know how to feel about that or reconcile that. And so that's kind of what started me on this. And going through that period was really hard, but it was really helpful that somebody understood that I was feeling sad about what I thought my life would be. And I was also struggling with moving forward with what my life actually was. And there weren't a lot of people around at the time. There weren't a lot of therapists talking about this with their clients, or whatever. And so I figured, if I can't find somebody to talk to, other people can't find that person either. So I'm going to be that person. And that's what led me to go and seek my counseling degree, because I knew that I needed that and I wanted to be that for someone else. So that's kind of how I started on that. That'd be the first big piece. But the other part is that when I started working with a population that had a lot of loss involved in their lives, it was there's community violence, but just a lot of death within this population I was working with. And I had to face death over and over and over again at different levels with the clients that I was working with. And I realized I need to be better at this because I need to be better for them. They need this. They're coming to me in these moments that are really, really hard, and I need to be there and know what I'm doing. And so that's when I started doing some of the more professional development work of my own, of what do you do when you're sitting with someone in grief? How do you help them, create hope and stories about this and help them as they progress and integrate this into their life? And so that kind of is what led me to this. And then, of course, along the way, I've had my own more personal experiences of grief. And those are the hardest lessons, right? And I just read something recently that they said that grief is a cruel kind of education. You learn when you have to go through it, you learn something. And I think I experienced a grief a couple years ago that has just taught me so much more about myself and about loss and compassion for those going through it than I think I ever would have learned otherwise. So that's kind of my journey and how I got to a place like this.
Okay, thank you for sharing. So some questions I have based on what you were just talking about would be your grief with your firstborn is not as objective as maybe the death of the loss of a child.
Right. Absolutely.
So one question I had coming into this is, what is appropriate to say to people when they report that they've lost someone? What I'm sorry. I'm sorry to hear that. What can you say? What is the least waste of breath to someone who's going through pain
Yeah.
that might actually even let them know that you're supportive?
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm sorry gets a bad rap for being like maybe an easy way out or like just a simple thing to say, but it's actually a really powerful thing to say. And it's better than a lot of other things we could say. Because the truth is that we are sorry. Like we wouldn't wish this for anyone,
Yeah.
whatever loss it is they're experiencing. And so just saying I'm sorry is a really genuine thing because you feel that with them. And you can even say that, like, I am really sad with you right now. Instead of saying I'm sad for you, like I feel that sadness with you can be a
Okay.
powerful thing to say. I
Okay.
think, oftentimes people don't know what to say about grief and loss. And so we try to say things that make things better. But in those moments, there's really not a lot we can say to resolve the grief for somebody else. But we can make them feel heard and loved. And that's what our role is. Like, I'm sorry, lets them know that we know that they're sad. And I'm here for you. And even being specific about what you can do can be really important. But I think that's what they need to hear rather than us trying to make it something lighter or better out of the loss, which I think is what people want to do, but it doesn't seem to be helpful.
And then, so that's more common. Like we're all going to be put in that
Mm-hmm.
conversation. We're all going to either lose someone or talk to someone who's lost someone. When you were having maybe like your firstborn was just a couple of years in and you were sort of like solidifying the new reality and
Mm-hmm.
you were grieving that loss of the mother-daughter relationship you thought you were going to have,
Mm-hmm.
what could someone outside of your family, what could they say that would maybe be sensitive? What would be appropriate to say in that
Yeah.
situation?
Yeah. I think what my best friend's mom told me was the best first thing to say. It was like it was okay to be sad because I felt like I was going to be a bad parent if I thought this way, if I was grieving the loss of what I thought I was going to have. And so I think just permission to feel what I was feeling was really, really powerful for me. Because it sticks with me even today. And I even use that when I talk to other people and make sure that they know, like, you can feel what you feel. Um, and try not to shame yourself about that feeling. And so I think that that's important. If they're feeling angry about something, it's okay to feel angry. Like anger does not mean you're not also sad or that you don't love the person or whatever. You can be angry. Just validating feelings is going to be important. I feel like people don't know what to do with grief. People don't know what to do with tears. Tears really can scare a lot of people, right? And they definitely don't know what to do with grief, especially if it's something that can't be fixed. And so I try to let people off the hook. Like, I know you can't fix this. I just need to vent. So I try to tell people that, like, I just need to talk about this. I just need to talk about the person that I lost or the things that are different in my life. And so giving someone space that they can talk about that and you kind of follow their lead can be really, really helpful. But I feel like when this happened to me with my firstborn, I people didn't know what to do. And so we kind of all just kind of went into our own little corners about what to do. So like I went into my place of feelings and research because I do all kinds of research about things and really trying to figure out what to do. And my husband went to his fix it mode and, like trying to fix things for me and for the house and for our child. But not acknowledging the feelings. And then there's some people that had denial and they didn't want to talk about it at all or acknowledge it. And all of that was really hard to manage. And so I think if I were to be in a similar situation, I would do it differently. I would be very, very specific with others in my life about what I needed. Like, this is how I'm feeling and this is what I need. And I think that might be helpful if you give somebody space so that they can say those things.
Okay, so yeah, I was just about to ask, like, if you had a time machine, or if you were talking to someone who had this similar challenge coming up in their life, is what advice would you have? So you kind of answered that already. Um, feel free to dive in deeper to that, or we can just move on.
Yeah, I think a really hard part about loss and sadness and the depression that comes with that is that when you're depressed, and depression in general, you're kind of getting to this hole, and all you can see is the hole. You can't see anything outside of it. All you see is this, like, all around you, the sadness and what's making you feel so like buried under. And so it can be really hard from that place to ask for what you need, to ask somebody for help. And so if somebody was on the outside, they recognize somebody is probably depressed or down or whatever, saying that, like, this is what I'm observing, this is what I see. It makes sense if you're feeling this way, given all that's going on. Like, just allowing them to know that, like, they're being seen and heard in that hole, because they might not know how to reach out, but if you reach in, that might be just enough for them to tell you what they need. And sometimes they just need you to be there in that space with them, like, and it's hard to be around people who are sad. It's hard to be around people who are grieving. But sometimes they just need us in that same space.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you for that. And kudos to you and all the other parents out there who are overcoming challenges and being rock star parents, even if they're not getting the package they thought they ordered. But
yeah. That's kind of the way it is. And I will say that that's been an ongoing grief process, because I think with every stage of her life comes new things that are just different for us. And I'm much better at it now. Like, she's an amazing person, and I love my relationship with her. It's so unique. But with every new thing, just I see that little bit again, like, oh, that's what other people get, but I get this, and I kind of feel it. But then that's just I move forward with it, and that's how it is, because I love her and she's amazing.
Yeah. Excellent. Good. So I'm sure she's lucky to have you.
I'm lucky to have her. I think she's taught me so much. Yeah.
So that's aside from the typical loss, which I think I think of life and death, and I think of loss, and maybe I'm just assuming other people, when they think of grief, it's always has to do with death or death, or but we can have the experience that you just discussed. But what are some of the other common grief stimulants, and what are people feeling in their bodies and going through when they are? What is grief within the body?
Yeah, that's a great question, because we can't separate our body and our mind and our experience. They're all just they just come together all the time. I think so. Any kind of grief, whether it be the actual, like, death of someone, or the loss of something else in your life, there's this, like, acute period that, right after it happens, where, like, your body can go numb. It can feel just, like, sluggish. You can have brain fog, like, you don't really know what's going on. It can be disorienting. It can be really hard to, like, make decisions or even care about the decision. Like, your emotions feel really numbed. And I think it's just the disbelief of it all. Like, I cannot believe this is what's happening, yet I still have to function. I still have to move on. And I think our body reacts to that. I think we feel very tired, very fatigued, but maybe don't sleep well. We might not have any appetite at all, or we might, like, seek comfort in food, but food's not giving us comfort. The things that, kind of like in depression, the things that bring us joy no longer bring us joy. That can happen also in grief. I could watch something that usually makes me laugh, and today I can't even engage in it, or listen to something that usually calms me down, and it doesn't work at all. So our body is just in this really disoriented state, because it's trying to process so many things, and it's trying to, like, manage the emotions, and it's all kind of living within us and not certain what to do. And that is definitely this acute stage, like right after something happens, we get in that place. And so, people talk about the busyness of, like, when somebody dies, the busyness that comes afterwards. Sometimes that's what just propels us forward, is all the tasks that we have to do. It's not fun, and it's not easy at all, like super unpleasant to have to make all these decisions when you don't want to do anything but just sit and cry or whatever, or be angry. But you have to make all these decisions, but somehow that propels us, because we have to do it. And so that, I feel like that's what happens. in that acute stage, but the acute stage doesn't last forever, and the grief keeps going. And so we can acclimate to it. Some people don't acclimate to it, and it can become prolonged grief. They can get really stuck in their grief. There's really no timeline for grief. But I would say, like, if those physical body symptoms are occurring months after a loss, then that's like a time to like reassess what's going on, to talk to somebody, to get some support for that, because the acute stage should not last very long. But it definitely can.
And then any other like what are some common grief stimulants? So you have
Oh yeah.
you have like someone passes away. What
Mhm.
are some other like
Yeah.
top few maybe that you see that will lead people to you?
Yeah. The end of a relationship, whether it be a friendship or a romantic relationship or a family relationship, just the end of a relationship brings a lot of feelings of loss, about what's happened, a lot of just thinking through, like, what did I do? What happened? What could I have done differently? Like re-examining, learning how to live a life without that person. So I feel like that's one that I see often. And another one I see is people who lose a job. That can bring about its own grief response, because it's a really traumatic thing to lose a job. And so people go through all the questioning and the anger and, all of that, and the sadness when a loss like that happens. Yeah, I mean, really anything, any kind of loss that you weren't expecting can create this like grief response.
And then with the grief response and everything that comes with that, what are some of your go-to strategies for processing grief?
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think it's important to know that as I talk about the acute stage, and then there's something called like the integrated grief, where we've learned how to live with the grief. But the truth is that like it never fully goes away. That little sense of loss. I feel like it's just things we carry with us as we move forward. So I think about significant losses in my life, and I am different now than I was before it. And I think I always will be as I move forward in my life. So I think it's important to know that like grief, there's no timeline for grief. It doesn't necessarily go away. You might get better at managing it, at managing the feelings that come with it. But I think it just is always there, because I don't want people to feel like, well, I should be over this by now, whatever it is, and I'm not, and feel ashamed for that. It might be worth getting some support for, but there's no shame in that. Like there's just no timeline, and I think you just carry it on with you. And so saying all that, like some go-to strategies, I think, I'm a therapist, and so I really believe in talking through things. I think getting things out of our head is a really important step. And we need to talk about all the feelings involved, whether we think we should feel them or not. We just kind of get that out. We need to tell our stories. And so anybody who's been through a loss of any kind, there's a story around it, about how they experience that. And I think it's a good thing to share that and have people hear that story. It's a really powerful thing to share. This is my lived experience, and now I'm going to share it with you. And so I think talking about it, having a space where you can talk and process what's happened, is going to be super important. I think when we keep things in our head, they get distorted. And so also talking about it can bring things out and let us see what's what. And I always talk about how, like when you've had like a dream and it was crazy or whatever, you wake up and you're like, I'm going to tell somebody this dream because it was just so weird. And you start to tell somebody about it, and it makes absolutely no sense. Like once it comes out of your head, it makes no sense anymore at all, right? And I feel like that's sometimes what happens to our thoughts. Our thoughts can just live there, but they can become kind of distorted. And once we start pulling them out, we can start to make more sense of them, or realize, oh, that doesn't make sense at all. Like I'm thinking things that aren't true or whatever. And it's just a really helpful process. So I always think that talking through things is a good thing. Another thing is just building your support system. whether you are preparing for a loss, so some people have, anticipatory grief when they know somebody is going to be passing away. Talking about that ahead of time, but also like building your support system. Know what you're going to need now, and know what you're going to need when that loss happens is going to be an important thing for someone. And your support system can be your family, it can be coworkers, it can be friends, a variety of people, but just knowing who you can go to, knowing who's going to be there and who's going to step up when you need that, and letting them know that, like, I know this hard time's coming, or this is what I'm going through, this is what I need. It's a really hard thing to ask. I'm a caregiver, and so it's hard for me to ask for care from other people, and it's something that I'm continually learning. Which is, I think, another thing that I learned from my daughter is that I had to ask for help because I didn't know what I was doing. And I think asking for help in these moments is an important thing to learn. And that's how you build that support system, is because you ask people, this is what I need, this is what I need right now, and let them step in and carry that with you. Other things that are kind of like go-to if you're processing grief, of course, journaling. I'm not a journaling person. But there are some people who love journaling. It's another way to capture those thoughts and bring them out. Participating in like grief rituals is a really important part, whether that be the funeral service or some kind of memorial, or on the anniversary of a loss, doing something to remember the person or remember what happened, recognizing the importance of the events that happened in your life. Those kind of rituals can be powerful. I think about a couple years ago, I guess it was just over a year ago, I lost my brother to cancer 2 years ago. And on the 1-year anniversary of that, he lived in Kansas City. And so I went to Kansas City because I wanted to be with his wife and his kids and his best friend. And my mom and I went out there, and we went to his favorite restaurant, and we all had the margarita. And, we weren't like celebrating his loss as much as we were celebrating that we got to have him in our life and what a, amazing person he was. And that was a ritual that I needed to do. I needed that at that 1-year anniversary time. I needed to participate in something that separated me from my life and brought me back into this space where I could just fully remember him and think about him and feel his presence again in that way, and be around people who were doing the same thing. I needed to be with those people. We needed to sit there and talk about him. And that was a ritual that I needed at the time. Now, on the 2nd-year anniversary, I didn't need that ritual as much. I needed my own time. I spent the day on my own and did my own thing because that's what I needed. But those are important things, and we need to recognize that, like, we can participate in that, and that connects us to the loved one, and it doesn't dismiss our grief, but it gives it a place in our life. Yeah. So I think that's important. People have like religious beliefs also that can bring that in there as well.
First of all, I'm sorry to hear about your brother.
Not
just because you told me that that's okay to say.
Yeah.
But I truly mean it. I have siblings, and I'm not looking forward to that phase of life. In the event that I don't go first.
Yeah.
With the ceremonies and rituals, so it sounds like we would never recommend that someone skip a funeral, or if they're in pain and they're heartbroken and they don't want to go, are we always encouraging them to just go?
I think it's worth a conversation about what's the feelings behind going and what are the feelings behind not going. I don't think I would ever force someone to be somewhere that they didn't want to be. I do think that there's benefits that can come from having those rituals and being around people who are doing that with you, because we don't create a lot of space in our life to do that. Outside of like a memorial service, like when else do we all get together to talk about someone and to remember their life and the value that they brought to us? And just how much we love them, like, and share that with one another. Like, we don't allow that in our lives very much. And so I would encourage somebody to participate for those reasons, but I would never say you have to, because if that's just not where you're at and what you can do, at some point in the future, maybe you'll want to do something. Maybe you can't do that, but maybe there's something else you want to do. That's okay too. The important thing about ritual is that it's giving space to our loss, giving space to our love, giving space to what we are experiencing. And I think that is an important thing to do, because the fact is, when you lose something or lose someone, life goes on. Like, and that can be one of the most maddening things about grieving, is that you're stuck in your grief, but the whole world just keeps moving, and it'll just keep propelling you forward too. And if we don't intentionally create that space to recognize our feelings, to recognize what happened, to recognize the person that we lost or the job or the relationship or whatever, we don't give it space, then we don't allow ourselves to like sit in that emotion. And I think it's an important thing to sit in the emotion, because they're really strong. And we can keep pushing them down for so long, but it's not going to work forever. At some point, those are going to come out. And so I think it's just the intentionality behind it.
Do you have any preferred organizations or religions you say that their grief rituals are maybe the most productive? Is there anything that you've kind of seen that you like, that you promote? Like, maybe if I'm an orphan and I've got, well, I guess if I have nobody, but if I have no background, if I wasn't raised on anything, if I'm just a blank slate, is there anywhere you point that you kind of like, I kind of like the form and fashion of this group?
Yeah. That's a great question. I think the two things that are coming to mind for me right now are, a while back when I worked at a nonprofit that helps students get to and through college. And I was providing the mental health support for them, but we had a lot of loss in their lives. And I was with them throughout that time. And so I attended memorial services that were so different than what I grew up with. It was just culturally different. The religion was different, just very, very different. And it was such a privilege to be able to be a part of that experience with them. But what I observed there was just this outpouring of grief. I'd never seen people just wail and cry at a service. I've never seen that before. I think I grew up in like this really Protestant kind of church where everybody's really quiet and somber, and nobody speaks with, loud voices. And that was not the case in these places at all. Like, it was just really loud, and people were allowed to like emote and like show these like emotions so big, because that's how big they are. And it was amazing. It was incredible. And I wish that there were more spaces where we could do that, where we could just feel this big emotion, as big as it can be, and other people accept that and not be scared of it and know that that's a part of this. And I found that that's just what these services were like. It wasn't just like one experience that I saw that. It was all of these different services that I would go through that they would happen every single time. And I was just amazed that people allowed one another to grieve in such an outward way, and it didn't scare them, and they, participated in it. So I feel like that's something that was really interesting. The other thing is, and this is drawing from my own background. So I am half Mexican. And so having the ofrenda and like, lighting the candles, that's where you light candles in memory, and you like put food there. And it's like when you have like a space where you have the people that you bless, like pictures of them or whatever. And that's how you memorialize them. You have that space. And of course, it's like celebrated right after Halloween. We talk about that, the Day of the Dead. But usually those spaces can exist throughout the whole year. And I love that tradition, that like these people are still a part of our life. They're still a part of my journey. I recognize who they were, what they brought to this world, and how they still are here with me. And I think that's just beautiful.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
When you're talking about like the bigger vocalizing and the wailing and things like that, I kind of like the saying that motion creates emotion. But I was talking to a sports psychologist, Dr. Joe Linack. I did an interview with him. It's maybe like episode 4 or so of the podcast, and he was kind of saying motion releases emotion, and I like that. I could see how it goes both ways, but yeah. So for like the grieving, I'm kind of like I'm sort of like the carpenter with a hammer. Is I really like exercise and fitness.
Hmm.
I'm always gonna say, well, sitting around and um, is not ideal for process. So I'm always gonna kind of want to promote
Hmm.
motion a little bit more. So um, is it just everybody does it in their own way, and other people need to sit and think, and I need to go out and move around?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, likely. I think there is something really big about physically moving, though, that can be good for our thoughts, organizing for our thoughts. Um, Obviously, it's good for our body, but it can also calm down these really big emotions that feel like they're not being managed. And so I think physical activity can be huge for that. But yeah, certainly other people might have other outlets. Some people might write. They might just really get into writing and need to do that. Some people, go to their music, if they have music talents and they can play on the piano or play a song or whatever. Yeah, I mean, they find outlets for it. I think our emotions, they want to be felt, right? And when we deny them, they kind of get pushed down and they become more numb the more we push them down. And so I encourage people to manage them by not letting them explode everywhere all the time, but don't also push them down to where they numb. Like there's this balance in between
Yeah,
and letting them come out in some way and finding like really positive or effective ways for them to come out that, don't end up hurting us in the process, if at all possible.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so for those people who maybe don't process their grief, and maybe this might be a little bit of a cluster, so they go through acute grief,
Mhm.
and you said that gives them like a 2 month window, and after that, it's maybe
I
not.
mean, it's a short period of time. Let's just say that
Yeah.
it's acute, so it's supposed to be a short
Okay.
period of time. But yeah.
Okay. Well, let's say they're more of a emotion bottler, and
Hmm.
they just shove that stuff deep down. Some people say where it belongs, um, they don't process and they don't express. What are some of the ways that you might see that explode and be forced out of them down the road?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, I think a couple things could happen. So one is that they could explode, and the other is that they could go numb, but also lose connection to their feelings. So the explosion piece is, um, when we start to feel something, but we don't have an outlet for it, it starts to come out in other ways, right? So, like if I'm angry about something that's happened during my day, but then I go home, I might take it out on my kitchen cabinets because I slammed them. You know what I'm saying? Or I might stomp around or like sigh really deep and huff and puff or whatever. Um, Hopefully not take it out on my family, but that can happen too sometimes, right? Like it just starts to spill out. Um, it affects my sleep. Like I don't sleep as well when I'm feeling all these emotions, but trying not to manage them. It just starts to come out in all these places. And so you'll recognize it. You'll see it. You'll see that like I am overreacting to things that really I should be. I'm here, but like I should be down here when I'm acting on whatever's happening, but I keep coming up to here all the time, or I feel like I'm on the edge all the time. Well, that's because you've shoved everything down and just keeps raising it up. And so you'll just feel that way. You can feel like you're on the verge of tears all the time for no reason. That's why, people are like, I don't know why I'm crying about this. I'm not sad about this. Well, it's because you haven't allowed that to be processed. So it's just coming out wherever it can. So I think that they'll recognize it because they start to act and overreact in ways that they wouldn't normally. But the other side of it, like I said, was if you push it down for too long, then you become numb. And so it's kind of like a nerve that if a nerve is pushed on for too long and it has too much pressure, you can lose sensitivity in that nerve. And then that changes things for mobility and all of that, right? Um, and I think if you lose access to your feelings, you stop remembering what it was like to feel sad. And you don't remember it the next time something happens that maybe you should feel sad or anger. You don't feel anything anymore because I've numbed myself to all of that. And people do that as a protective factor. They don't want to feel their feelings, but it's not great because our feelings are still there and we need to know what we're thinking and feeling about things. And if we've numbed them, we've lost that part of ourselves.
Um, how about how about utilizing humor? So um, sometimes that's my avenue,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's appropriate or not. But I know I know there's some police officers, like I was talking to a guy who was on a SWAT team for years, and he was saying between his time in the Marines and then
Mm,
being a SWAT officer for several years, seeing just all the horrible things you can see,
hmm
and he was saying that it's common for the other SWAT officers that they have to express themselves, and
hmm
if they're not crying, then it tends to be like a maybe like a humorous reflection on how
hmm
horrible the thing they just went through was. And he said that that was actually helped them stay healthier versus I don't my lingo is not perfect, but maybe like a patrolman, someone like a single individual in a police car who has like the day to themselves. They go around and do tasks and
hmm
what fill in the blank for whatever police officers do. He said that when those police officers that are by themselves, they go out and have a stressful or horrible situation unfold, is that they get back in the car by themselves
hmm
and they drive around and go
hmm
about the day. When the SWAT officers go through something horrible and stressful, they get in a car with other people who just did the same thing, and in their own way they process it and they talk about it and
hmm
they experience it. So
Yeah.
um, are we allowed to use humor? How?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, I think it's one of those things that you have to know like the appropriate time and place. But that makes perfect sense. I've heard other people talk about something very similar, whether it's working in like an ER, the doctors, whatever, they have to find ways to like lighten the mood because you can't live in this space of deep despair and sadness all the time. It's a really hard place to be. And so we do that. We use humor to kind of lighten that. And it's part of our humanity, humor is, and to see the humor in things. And I think we need to laugh along with crying. If we do it both in the same hour, that's great. But yeah, I think humor can definitely be used. I think it's the danger with humor at times can be when we use it to mask a feeling rather than, help alleviate a mood. We might make fun of something that we shouldn't make fun of, or, whatever. Like, we really should be sad about, but we use humor to mask that. That's when it's not as healthy. But definitely, humor is like one of my personal values, actually. If you've ever done like a values activity where you like identify your top values, it's in my top 5 is humor because I just think it's so important to daily life to be able to laugh and not take things so seriously all the time. So I think humor has its place in grief and in loss and in heavy experiences like what you're talking about, where we just need to connect to our humanity again. And it kind of, I think there's something about hope that is in humor that if I can laugh now, I can probably laugh again at something, I will feel happy again at something. Not everything is always awful and terrible and bad. There is still hope.
Okay, that's good. I might be using that sound bite for the next time I put my foot in my mouth at the wrong time. Just explain to people that I'm processing and working through some things.
hmm Yep, that's not uncommon.
Um, so this is the Winning Wellness Podcast, and the goal is it's kind of a two-sided. One side is that some people are not well enough to go out and pursue their goals, whether that is like how they look in a mirror or scoring a touchdown or basketball shot, whatever it is. And then the other side of it is those people are fit and well physically, mentally, and they're pursuing excellence. They're trying to achieve new things that they've not done before.
hmm
Is there anything that we haven't talked about today that you would say would promote wellness that you'd want to talk about?
Yeah. I think maybe I wouldn't say like the most important, but like something very important that I always do with my clients is I want to respect and nourish this connection between their body and their mind because they're just so interconnected. So, like, you got to care for your body. You just have to do things that care for your body, but you also have to care for your mind. And when you don't do one but do the other, one of them, they both end up hurting, right? And so I think just recognizing how connected they are, and that when I take care of my body, I'm taking care of my mind. And when I take care of my mind, my body's going to respond to that in very good ways. And so, yeah, and then when I think about grief, that is something that I think about when I talk to people like, about their loss, or when they, especially in the acute stage, I ask them, like, what are you doing for yourself? How are you feeling? Are you sleeping okay? Are you eating enough? Like, I know you're not going to eat a lot, but are you eating enough? Are you fueling okay? Um, how are you caring for your body? And then if people are going through some physical things, we talk about the mind part of it. My spouse has chronic back issues, and so he's in chronic pain because of that. And chronic pain can lead to all kinds of mental health struggles. There's research done about that. Like, it can lead to significant depression, anxiety, things like that. And so, while I can't fix the pain, he can work on the depression piece of it, or, the sadness about mobility, or about living in pain all the time and never like escaping that. Like, that actually helps the pain. And they've talked about mindfulness helping pain and things like that. And so I think just recognizing how connected they are can be really, really important for anybody, and particularly maybe the people that you're working with. You just can't deny one or the other.
Yeah. I still go to the library every once in a while. And for my younger listeners, there's these places that are just full of books.
They're great places.
They are great places. But I go to the library maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I had pre-requested. I was just on a stint, because what I do now is a lot of times I'll learn things, and like, instead of reading about several different things, I'll
Mhm.
this is what I'm going to learn about this month or
Mhm.
next 2 months. And I had reserved like 12 books on back pain.
Mm.
And I get them and I bring them home, and I'm leafing through it. I'm like, there's like 2 books in here that are about the physiology and like the anatomy. And
Mhm.
the rest of these books are just about pain management and creating like a positive
Mhm.
mindset. And so I'm sorry to hear your husband is struggling with that. I know it can be very, very distracting and disruptive and painful on top of that. But yeah, that is just
Yeah.
its own intricate, complex problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, when you think about different expressions of loss, or having different experience of loss, loss of mobility is one that I know that he has experienced, but other people do too, when their body changes. And we all experience that as we get older, losing the ability to do certain things that maybe we used to be able to do. It can be really hard. It can be upsetting to know that, like, I should be able to do this, but I can't. My body can't do this anymore for whatever reason, or just because I'm aging, and it kind of stinks. And so that's another kind of loss that people experience. But, again, recognizing that, like, you have to take care of the mind part of that too, like the body, and that helps the body, and that can help with the pain or whatever is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say that you mentioning the books thing made me think of, going back to like grief and loss. After my brother died, I found myself in a space where I just consumed a lot of material reading about loss. Like, I was desperate to like connect to other people's experiences in that way, to then I like define my own experience of it. And so I was looking over my reading list, because I keep a list of all the books that I read every year. And my book list for the year that he died and the year after almost exclusively were memoirs about people who had experienced some kind of loss in their life, like almost exclusively. And I just find that fascinating, that I just needed that so badly. Um, and that really did feed something for me, like that I probably couldn't get from other people, but I got it through books, and I thought it was pretty powerful.
How about that? And is the term bibliotherapy, would that be appropriate for?
It could be, yeah, right.
Okay, so bibliotherapy, I don't think I'm making that up. I think I was taught to me at some point, is that we'll read to, as part of our process, to gain perspective and to look at our problem and
Mm-hmm.
our challenges from a different perspective, I guess. At what point do you think a person is being too inundated with a problem focused, attention, instead of maybe like if a person is on their third year of reading books about grief and loss,
Mhm.
at what point should they pick up like a Steve Martin like comedy book or like a
Mhm.
romance novel? At what point should we just put ourselves in a more positive, you and I, we were just talking about humor. At what point
Mhm.
do we need to start inserting some more positive and lighthearted material?
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I think that's a really valid question. And it's really hard. It's hard to say that to someone, like, because what you're recognizing is that they're appeared stuck in their grief. Um, and it's not that we want them to move on for our sake, but for whatever reason, it feels like they're not for their own, like they're not moving forward for themselves. And that's a stuck place. And I really want to be careful that I don't want people to hear me saying like, you've got to move on from loss. Because I don't think we ever move on from it, like at all. I think we move forward with it. Like it's something we carry with us. Um, but I think recognizing that might be powerful for someone to hear, like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm observing. How is that experience for you? And what I find is when people get stuck in grief, and I just heard somebody talk about this recently, and it was really powerful. But if you think about like if you're in a boat and you're in a really bad storm, and your options are you need to like find a way out of it, but you have to go through it, right? You have to go through that storm, and it can be really choppy and really rough and risky. But then when you're out of it, you're out of the storm. But sometimes people get stuck in the eye of the storm and they don't want to leave it. Like that's where it feels calm enough, but they know the storm's all around them and they're scared to push through it. They're scared about what would happen. Like, I'm scared if I stop grieving that I'm going to forget this person. I'm scared if I stop grieving that it'll diminish the love I have for them. I'm scared to be happy again because that doesn't seem fair to be happy when I've lost somebody. It doesn't feel fair that I get to experience all these things that they don't get to experience anymore. We feel a lot of that guilt and that shame. Like we can't smile again. I think people might be afraid of humor, that they don't have the right to do that because the sadness is just so big and they don't think I'll ever smile again or they should smile again. But we do and we can, but they just get so scared. And so they just get stuck in that storm. And the longer you're there, then the more stuck you are. Right. And so like it's hard then to then get through it and to find that there might be some calmer places for you outside of it. And so I think just recognizing people are in that space can be a good start.
We don't need to put a label on everything, but if we call that survivor's guilt,
Mm.
would is survivor's guilt really just a form of grief?
I, it can be, yeah. I think it could be a part of the grief. Yes, definitely. I think people feel survivor's guilt for all kinds of reasons, whether it be their own actions or inactions and something that's happened, or their yeah, the way they feel about themselves, the way they feel about somebody else who had the loss or whatever. Yeah, but I do think it can be a part of that. Yeah, that guilt that comes in. Just why am I here? Why do I get to still be here and do all these things? But they don't. I thought that last year when I went to my nephew's graduation, something that I know my brother looked forward to forever and ever, but didn't get to see. And I thought, well, that's so unfair that I get to be here and he doesn't. And I did feel really guilty about that. But I tried to like make it something where I'm going to be there. He can't, but I'm going to be here for the both of us. I'm going to be here representing him as much as I can and letting my nephew know how proud my brother would be of him and things like that. But yes, I think the guilt can be a part of that grief.
Really have one question left for you,
Hmm.
and that is, what question have I not asked you that I should have asked you? And maybe I asked all of them, or if you've got anything else to share. Uh,
Um, yeah, I feel like we've gone through all the questions that I thought you would ask. I guess I just have some other thoughts on like things people can take away if they're processing a loss or whatever, that might be helpful because there's just no one way to go through a loss. There isn't, and we all experience it differently. Even if we're all experiencing the same loss, we're all going to be in like our own places and how we go through it. And so just finding your way to get through it that's healthy for you and helpful for you is going to be important. But some other like ways to process or get through this. Um, is, practicing self-care. We talk a lot about self-care in our world right now, but self-care is how you take care of your body, how you take care of your mind, limits that you put for yourself or limits that you put for other people. Like I can only do so many things. I can only let um, so many things happen in my life right now because I just can't manage more than that. And that's an okay thing. Like that's part of self-care is putting limits up and putting boundaries up. S Shifting expectations for yourself. If you are grieving, going through a loss, you got to allow yourself to be sad or feel those feelings, but like also know that there are things that you don't need to put on you don't need to put more shame or guilt on yourself by expecting yourself to be a certain way by a certain time, or, I should be better, I should be happier, I should be, really enjoying things, or I should be doing this and getting back to life or whatever, all the shoulds. Um, just shift expectations. Know that like loss and grief can be a really hard thing to work with, and give yourself grace in those moments, knowing that, and then give grace to others who are going through it as well. If you've ever been around somebody who's gone through something significant like a loss or of someone, you just have to offer a lot of grace. Like they're not who they would want to be right now. They might not act how they would hope that they would act in any situation because they just can't. They're just really experiencing this loss. And so just have grace for that and love and compassion. Another thing that people always tell others when you are going through a loss of some kind is to not make big decisions because you're probably not working with a brain that's like able to function and think through everything, right? It's you're working with a sad brain, basically. I say that. And then after my brother died, I left a job and picked a new job. So like I made a big change and that was okay. But and people do that. But because I think we look for change, like I can't change this in my life, so I'm going to change this. And so just be mindful about the decisions that you're making. Make sure that they're going to be actually what's good for you. So that's just something to put out there. Another thing go ahead. Did you have something to say?
Would that change maybe the change you made, or it's almost like your own rituals that you're doing a change. Like I know there's some people walking around and their tattoos have massive significance to them.
Mm-hmm.
It might be the birth year and the death year of a brother on
Mm-hmm.
their chest or anything like that. So you know that's not the biggest decision. I guess a tattoo is kind
Mm-hmm.
of it depends who you ask, I guess, but you can kind of instill some changes and like maybe like
Mm-hmm.
some directed suffering, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
to like process a little bit. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah. I like that. That's a good way to put it. I think the big changes that you want to avoid are changes just for change's sake, right? Um, going back to my example of changing jobs, looking back, it was still the right decision for me. Maybe I didn't recognize that in the moment, but actually I needed to step away from what I was doing to do something a little different. And that was a good change for me. I think that was like a boundary that I had to put in my life. I needed something different for myself to be able to move forward. And that was a change I needed to make. That was the area that I could make a change. So I did. But some people can make changes that really end up hurting themselves or hurting their family. And so that's why like you're not really, your brain is working, obviously, but it's a sad brain. It's a grief brain. And so it might not be thinking through everything from a perspective of hope. So, just being mindful of that. Yeah.
It's my understanding that in your brain, in stressful times, blood flow and neural activity in your frontal lobe decreases,
Mm-hmm.
and the reverse happens in your amygdala. And your amygdala is kind of like your stress radar. So in a stressful time, your ability to make good decisions
Mm-hmm.
is like physiologically diminished, and your ability to be ticked off by every little thing and to be aware of all the negative things in your life
Mm-hmm.
is ramped up. So I think maybe that plays a role as well.
Yeah, absolutely it does. And something I've learned about some like the brain research about grief, it's kind of along those lines, but it takes our brain a while to acclimate to the loss, like our brain, because our brain is used to something in our life being a certain way. and then that has been removed, but our brain needs time to like understand that. And so we have to give our brain and our body the time to like take this in and feel this and think about it and understand what this actually means. And if we don't give ourselves the time, we just make decisions. We're not allowing that space for our brain to like catch up to where we're at.
Yeah, it makes me think of like maybe after something stressful or horrible has occurred, is you wake up in the morning and you have like a few minutes of like normalcy, and then you just lower your head and you go, oh yeah, this is something, a new negative change has occurred, as it just, you get like 5 or 10 minutes of just normalcy, and then you're just like, oh man, like now we lost so-and-so, or this is the new problem I have in my life.
First morning like amnesia almost, where you don't remember what's what. It's an interesting point, right? Just that your brain can do that, but then all of a sudden it just comes flooding back like, oh yeah, that happened. Like that actually happened. Yeah, that can happen a lot during that acute stage of grief too, where we just haven't gotten used to that this is really what our new life is or whatever. Yeah. What else I was going to tell you? Oh, something that when you're talking about grief and loss, whether it be the loss of someone or the loss of something in your life, but allowing people to talk about it, I think we're afraid. We don't know how to sit with grief. I've said that before, but allowing space to talk about it, but also, giving people space to not talk about it and to talk about something not related to that at all. Like just kind of following the lead of whoever's going through the loss can be really good. Because what I've learned about grief is that there are some times when I don't want to think about it, I don't want to feel my loss. I can't. I've got to do this thing and I've got to do this and I can't even think about that. But then there are other times when I just kind of want to swim in it. And I just need to like be immersed in my sadness. And people that can sit in both of those spaces with me are really important people in my life. But both are okay. There are times when you won't be able to process and think and talk. And there are other times when you most definitely need to. And having both is going to be a really, really important thing for people who are going through that.
Thank you for that. If you have any other thoughts, I'd love to hear them. If not, you've given some excellent professional expertise, personal experience, and overall advice, and I really thank you for that. This is something I can tell already that I'll be returning to this when I'm faced with some grief, and I'm excited. It's nice to have something. Now I have something to offer my student athletes and some of the young people that I'm around when they are going through sort of their first or one of their first hard times and losses, is that just to let them know you're not the first person to feel these things, and there are steps you can take to just promote wellness. So thank you for your time and everything else today. Thank you so much for listening to our Winning Wellness podcast. If you have any questions or suggestions for podcast guests or topics, you can submit those through YouTube comments. You can message me on Instagram. My handle is Mitch Schwartzman, or you can email me at coachmitchschwartzman@gmail.com.